Om Sarashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Parameshwara. Good. Be seated, please. Om Parameshwara. Good. Son. Yeah. No, not necessary. Good. I heard a cell phone on. Any other cell phones maybe you could turn off before we begin? Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Parameshwara. Good. Where are you? Here. Very good. Nice to see all of you here. It's been a while since we've had such a large gathering. Thankfully, the pandemic is slowly winding down, and so you can feel more comfortable coming here for our programs. It's really wonderful to have you here. It's also nice to have all of our viewers online participating also in this celebration of the New Year. So Happy New Year to all of you here and all of you watching online. We have a simple but meaningful program for today. We'll start in just a few minutes with puja at our altar. Simple puja, because we definitely want to invoke Ishwara's grace, Ishwara's blessings to help us through all the tough bits that are ahead in the coming year. Many wonderful things are ahead, we know that. But few tough times will also probably be there, so we will invoke God's grace for that reason. Then we will recite the 10 Shanti mantras from the Vedas, prayers for peace. We always pray for peace at the beginning of each New Year. And then I have a nice message. In fact, a really nice message, I think, to share with you today. So I'll look forward to that as well. So with that brief introduction, we can proceed with our puja. Oh, Parameshwara. Om Gange Chamane Chava Godavari Saraswati Narmade Sindhu Kaveri Chalesman Sannidhyam Kuru. Keshva Narayana Madhava Vishnu Marasantara Vakrama Vamrashir Shikesh Padma Om Shuklam Bhararam Vishnu Shashvar Yaye Sarva Vigno Prashana Om Bhur Om Mamo Pata Samasta Duridikshaya Dwara Shri Parameshwar Prityartam, Shri Parameshwar Sada Siddhyartam, Shri Parameshwar Prasadat, Sarva Janananam Dharmartakama Moksha Siddhyartam, Sarva Janananam Cha Kshema Stharya Virya Vijaya, Ayora Rogya Siddhyartam, Sarva Bhishtatama Siddhyartam, Praptyartam Abhivradyartam Cha, Yam Shri Mahaganapati, Shri Dakshinamurti Shiva, Shri Radha Krishna Pujam Karashyamaha. The mantras are up on the screen. Please join me in reciting as we begin our worship of Lord Ganesha. Om Shuklam Bharadaram Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam Prasannavaranam Dhyayet Sarva Vignopashantaye. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Shri Mahaganapatam Dhyayami Asmin Bimbe Shri Mahaganapatam Avahayami. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Asanam Samsthapayami. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Parayoho Padyam Samarpayami. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Hastayoho Hargyam Samarpayami. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Achamaniyam Samarpayami. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Snanam Snapayami Punarachamaniyam Samarpayami. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Vastrartama Bharanartam Cha Pushpani Samarpayami. Om Sumukhaya Namaha. Om Ekadantaya Namaha. Om Kapilaya Namaha. Om Gajakarnakaya Namaha. Om Lambodaraya Namaha. Om Vikataya Namaha. Om Vignarajaya Namaha. Om Vinayakaya Namaha. Om Dhumaketave Namaha. Om Ganadhyakshaya Namaha. Om Palachandraya Namaha. Om Gajananaya Namaha. Om Vakratundaya Namaha. Om Shurpakarnaya Namaha. Om Herambaya Namaha. Om Skandapurvajaya Namaha. Om Bhargadeva Siddhi Prachodayat. Om Pranaya Swa. Om Apanaya Swa. Om Vyanaya Swa. Om Adanaya Swa. Om Brahmane Swa. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Mahanaivedyam Nivedayami. Punarachamaniyam Samarpayami. Om Ekadantaya Vidmahe Vakratundaya Dhimahi. Tanno Dantif Prachodayat. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Dhupam Hagrapayami. Om Shri Mahaganapataye Namaha. Deepam Sandarshayami. Dubadipantam Panarachamaniyam Samarpayami. Om Shri. Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Dakshinamurtaye Mahyam Medham Prajnam Prayacha Swaha. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Shri Dakshinamurtam Dhyayami Asman Bambe Shri Dakshinamurtam Avahayami. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Asanam Samsthapayami. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Parayoho Padyam Samarpayami. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Hastayoho Hargyam Samarpayami. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Achamaniyam Samarpayami. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Snanam snapayami punarachamaniyam samarpayami. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Vastrartama bharanartum cha pushpani samarpayami. Om Bhavaya Devaya Namaha. Om Sharvaya Devaya Namaha. Om Ishanaya Devaya Namaha. Om Pashupataye Devaya Namaha. Rudraya Devaya Namaha. Om Raya Devaya Namaha. Om Bhimaya Devaya Namaha. Om Mahate Devaya Namaha. Om Bhargo Deva Siddhi Prachodayat. Om Pranaya Om Apanaya Swaha. Om Vyanaya Om Udanaya Samanaya. Om Brahmanaya Swaha. Om Shri Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Mahanaivedyam Nivedayami. Om Tatpurushaya Vidmahe Mahadevaya Dhimahi. Tanno Rudra Prachodayat. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Dhupam Hagrapayami. Om Shri Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Deepam Sandarshayami. Om Dupadipantam Punarachamaniyam Samarpayami. Om. Om Vasudeva Sudham Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Gopi Jana Vallabha Charanan Sharanam Prapadye. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Shri Radha Krishnam Dhyayami Husband Bimbe. Shri Radha Krishnam Avahayami. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Asanam samstapayami. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Parayoho Padyam Samarpayami. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Hastayoho Hargyam Samarpayami. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Achamaniyam Samarpayami. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Snanam snapayami punarachamaniyam samarpayami. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Vastrartam abharanartam cha pushpani samarpayami. Om Keshavaya Namaha. Om Narayanaya Namaha. Om Madhavaya Namaha. Om Govindaya Namaha. Om Vishnave Namaha. Om Madhusudanaya Namaha. Om Trivikramaya Namaha. Om Vamanaya Namaha. Om Sridharaya Namaha. Om Hrishikeshaya Namaha. Om Padmanabhaya Namaha. Om Damodaraya Namaha. Om Pranaya Swaha. Om Apanaya Swaha. Dhyanaya Swaha. Om Udanaya Swaha. Om Brahmane Swaha. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Mahanai Vedyam Nivedayami Punarachamaniyam Samarpayami. Om Narayanaya Vidmahe Vasudevaya Dhimahi Tanno Vishnu Prachodayat. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Dhupamagrapayami. Om Namo Gopi Jana Vallabhabhyam Shri Radha Krishnaya Namaha. Deepam Sandarshayami. Pudipandam Panarachamaniyam Samarpayami. Om Parameshwara. We'll conclude our brief puja with a Vedic arati. Would you stand, please? Om Rajari Rajaya Prasahya Sahinehe Namo Vayam Vaihi Shravanaya Kurmehe Same Kaman Kama Kamaya Mahyam Kameshwaro Vaihi Shravano Dadatu Kuberaya Vaishravanaya Maharajaya Namaha. Om Natatra Suryo Bhati na Chandra Tarakam Nema Vidyuto Bhanti Kuto Yamagnihi Tameva Bhantamanu Bhati Sarvam Tasya Bhasa Sarvamidam Vibhati. Om Parameshwara. Om Parameshwara. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Om, 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 Om. Please be seated. Very good. Nice to hear all of you chanting the mantras during the puja. Sounds really nice. Okay, before my discourse, we want to recite these wonderful Shanti mantras. Let me push the right button here. From each of the four Vedas, certain mantras are recited for the sake of Vishwa Shanti, world peace, and there's a group of 10 of them. We'll be reciting them this morning. And, yeah, no problem. And as I'm reciting each line, please read the translation so you know what it means, and then repeat after me. The first of the 10 begins. Om Shanno Mitrasham Varunaha. Om Shanno Mitrasham Varunaha. Shanno Bhavatvaryama. Shanno Bhavatvaryama. Shannahindro Brahaspatihi. Shannahindro Brahaspatihi. Shanno Vishnurukramaha. Shanno Vishnurukramaha. Namo Brahmane. Namo Brahmane. Namaste Vayo. Namaste Vayo. Tvameva pratyaksham brahmasi. Tvameva pratyaksham brahmasi. Tvameva pratyaksham brahma vadishyami. Tvameva pratyaksham brahma vadishyami. Ritam vadishyami. Ritam vadishyami. Satyam vadishyami. Satyam vadishyami. Tanmamavatu. Tanmamavatu. Tadvaktaramavatu. Tadvaktaramavatu. Avatu mam. Avatu mam. Avatu vaktaram. Avatu vaktaram. Together. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We'll recite this prayer together. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Yaschandasam Rishabho Vishwarupaha. Om Yaschandasam Rishabho Vishwarupaha. Chandobhyo Dhyamratahat Sambabhuva. Chandobhyo Samendro Medhayaha Spranotu. Samendro Medhayaha Spranotu. Amritasya devadharano bhuyasam. Amritasya devadharano bhuyasam. Shariram me vicharshanam. Shariram me vicharshanam. Jihva me madhumattama. Jihva me madhumattama. Karnaha bhyam bhuri vishruvam. Karnaha bhyam bhuri vishruvam. Brahmana koshosi medhaya pihitaha. Brahmana koshosi medhaya pihitaha. Shutam me gopaya. Shrutam me gopaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Aham Vrikshasya Reriva. Om Aham Vrikshasya Reriva. Kirtif Prishtangireriva. Kirtif Prishtangireriva. Urdhva pavitro vajiniva swamratamasmi. Urdhva pavitro vajiniva swamratamasmi. Dravinagam savarchanam. Dravinagam savarchasam. Sumedha hamratokshataha. Sumedha hamratokshataha. Iti trishankor vedanu Iti trishankor vedanu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam. Purnat Purnamudachyate. Purnat Purnamudachyate. Purnasya Purnamadaya. Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Notice it has a different melody, that Om Shanti. Om Hapyayantu Mamangani. Om Hapyayantu Mamangani. Vak Pranashchakshushrodram. Vak Pranashchakshushrodram. Atho balamindriyani cha sarvani. Atho balamindriyani cha sarvani. Sarvam brahmopanishadam. Sarvam brahmopanishadam. Maham brahma nirakuryam. Maham brahma nirakuryam. Mama brahma nirakarota. Mama brahma nirakarot. Anirakaranamastvanirakaranam me hastu. Anirakaranamastvanirakaranam me hastu. Tadatmani nirate. Tadatmanirate ya upanishatsu dharmas. Ya upanishatsu dharmas. Te mayi santu. Te mayi santu. Te mayi santu. Te mayi santu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Vang Me Manasi Pratishtita. Om Vang Me Manasi Pratishtita. Mano Me Vachi Pratishtitam. Mano Me Vachi Pratishtitam. Aviravir Mahedhi. Aviravir Mahedhi. Vedasya Mahanihi Staha. Vedasya Mahanihi Staha. Shutam me ma prahasihi. Shutam me ma prahas. Anenadhitena. Anenadhitena. Ahoratran sandadhami. Ahoratran sandadhami. Ratam vadishyami. Ratam vadishyami. Satyam vadishyami. Satyam vadishyami. Tanmamavatu. Tanmamavatu. Tadvaktaramavatu. Tadvaktaramavatu. Avatu mam. Avatu mam. Avatu vaktaram. Avatu vaktaram. Avatu vaktaram. Avatu vaktaram. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bhadram no api vataya manaha. Om Bhadram no api vataya namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bhadram karnebhyash shrunuyama devaha. Om Bhadram karnebhyash shrunuyama devaha. Bhadram pashyemakshabhiryajatraha. Bhadram pashyemakshabhiryajatraha. Sthirairangaihi stuštuvagam sastanubihi. Sthirairangaihi stuštuvagam sastanubihi. Vyashema devahitam yadayuhu. Vyashema devahitam yadayuhu. Swasti nahindro vruddhashravaha. Swasti nahindro vruddhashravaha. Swasti nah pusha vishvavedaha. Swasti nah pusha Swasti nastarksho harashtanemihi. Swasti nastarksho harashtanemihi. Swasti no brahaspatir dadhatu. Swasti no brahaspatir dadhatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. And the last of the 10 Shanti mantras. Om Yo Brahmanam Vedadhati Purvam. Om Yo Brahmanam Vedadhati Purvam. Yo Vai Vedamscha Prahinoti Tasmai. Yo Vai Vedamscha Prahinoti tasmai. Tam hadevam atma buddhi prakasham. Tam hadevam atma buddhi prakasham. Mumukshur vai sharanamaham prapadye. Mumukshur vai sharanamaham prapadye. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. So beautiful, those 10 Shanti mantras. Okay. Excuse me just a moment. Good. Very good. Sorry. Once again, Happy New Year to you all. Welcome to you, all of you in the hall, all of you watching online. What a wonderful way to start the new year. They say starting the new year off on the right foot, so to speak. You get the idea of that. It's a perfect way to start the new year with some prayer, chanting for world peace. Oh, there's a joke about this. With children, we included these prayers in almost every class. Sometimes the children said, why do we have to chant these prayers every time? And I explained, well, these are prayers for world peace. We have to pray these prayers every time until there's world peace. And we're still trying to get there. And as a matter of fact, that ties into the topic for today. And the topic is how to find peace in a world where there's not always peace. Right now, the world is at war once again, sadly, with the terrible war raging in Ukraine. A terrible, terrible situation. And you might say, well, Swamiji, that war doesn't really affect us on a day-to-day basis. There are other wars that do take place that do affect each and every one of us here and now in this country and in many other places. Right now, we're in the midst of what's been called the culture war. You know what I'm talking about, right? So we see this tremendous divisiveness in our country today, where people align themselves either on the right with the so-called conservatives or on the left with the so-called liberals, and then they fight like cats and dogs. This is a kind of war. They call it culture war, cultural war. It's an accurate term, and you have to agree that these wars, that war, the culture war, does indeed affect us. So here we are living in the midst of this culture war and trying to find Shanti, trying to find inner peace. How can we do so? How can we find peace at a time of war? In our Bhagavad Gita class, we just finished our study of chapter 14 on the three gunas. And at the end of the chapter, we came to this brilliant, it's a wonderful verse, which really describes the key to finding peace in a, we can call this a war zone. My gosh. We live in a war zone, a battlefield. We're going to talk more about that battlefield. How to find peace in a war zone. Sri Krishna gives brilliant advice. Of course, Sri Krishna gave this advice to Arjuna where? On a battlefield. Pretty appropriate. Let's see this verse briefly. He says, Udasinavat asino. The theme I should introduce better here at the end of the chapter. Sri Krishna is talking about one who is guna atita. The chapter is on the three gunas, the three qualities. Here, at the end of the chapter, the discussion is about one who is atita, one who has transcended the three gunas, the one who has risen above worldliness, is a good way of putting it. And let's see how Sri Krishna describes a person as one who is udasinavat asinaha, a person who asinaha remains udasinavat, a little detached. But bear in mind that this is a healthy kind of attachment. It's not this apathy. There's a huge difference between detachment and apathy. Apathy means when you hear about something terrible going on and you feel or say, who cares? Who cares is a statement of apathy. It's a statement, and that apathy is actually harmful because we all bear responsibility to be engaged in addressing problems in the world. But the problem is, if we are so upset because of the wars going on, because of the culture war, if this culture war has dragged you down emotionally to such an extent, you might not be able to fulfill your responsibilities as well as you could. Anyway, the point is here, when Sri Krishna describes udasina, one who is detached, can we call it an engaged detachment? It's a detachment in which you do not abandon your responsibilities. You all know Sri Krishna's message in the Bhagavad Gita. He would never advocate just dropping out, as they said back in the 1960s. Sri Krishna would not approve of that message, drop out, because his message to Arjuna and everyone was to fulfill your dharma, your duties, your responsibilities. That message carries throughout the Bhagavad Gita, including here. So udasinaha, detached, means a kind of engaged detachment where you are still available to fulfill your responsibilities, but gunaihi na vichalyate, without being disturbed or distracted. It's much harder to fulfill your responsibilities when you are disturbed by what's going on around you. As I said before, you can get depressed seeing what goes on. It can pull you down tremendously. So, gunaihi na vichalyate, one who is not disturbed or distracted by all the nonsense going on around you. And that nonsense Sri Krishna describes here, I think, brilliantly. He says, Gunaha vartante ityevam. One who understands that the gunas are acting out. The world is acting in a normal fashion, which is to say that if you put children together, they don't always play together nicely, as we know. Children, when you put them together, they sometimes fight. And that, what can we do? It's natural. We teach them not to fight, but it's not uncommon. It certainly is natural when you put children together, they fight. When you put older children together, 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds, they also fight like children. When children fight, what do? Well, we have to bring up those children, help them mature, help them understand, help them learn to control their emotions so they're not fighting all the time. At the same time, we can't prevent the children from fighting at all times. As we said, it's natural for children to fight. So many of you have raised children, and I haven't. So you know this better than I do. And that is, sometimes you just have to let the children play, even when that play involves some fighting. Sometimes you have to intervene and teach the children a message, but at other times, you just have to let them play. And we joked about this in class. In fact, I had to correct my Hindi. Bacche khelne do. So you let the kids play. And there's going to be a message that you're going to see the importance of in just a few minutes. Sometimes you have to intervene, but sometimes you just let them play. So this is the idea. Now, we need to finish up this verse. Yaha avatishtati, one who is established in that understanding, that sometimes you have to intervene, but sometimes you just let the children play. One who has that understanding, one who is avatishtati, established in that understanding, na ingate, that person doesn't get disturbed. And those of you who are parents, you know this far better than I. You know that sometimes you just let the children play and you don't worry about it. Na ingate, you don't get disturbed. So this is the message of Sri Krishna at the end of chapter 14. It's a wonderful and helpful message to help all of us find some measure of peace in the midst of this battlefield of life. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. How to find peace on that battlefield of life. There's a problem. Here Sri Krishna talks about a healthy detachment. The opposite of a healthy detachment is an unhealthy engagement. So what would be an example of an unhealthy engagement, again, in the context of war? During World War II, I wasn't alive then, during World War II, the Japanese, in the media, in American press and British press and elsewhere, the Japanese were commonly referred to as chinks. To call the Japanese chinks was a way of belittling them, in fact, dehumanizing them. Something I remember, and many of you may remember, is that when this country was fighting in Vietnam, the North Vietnamese were dehumanized by calling them gooks. They were not human beings. They were gooks. Gooks should be killed. Kill the gooks. This is what we would call an unhealthy unhealthy engagement. Opposite of healthy detachment is unhealthy engagement. So you, by the way, if you're not fighting in Vietnam, why, if you're sitting, as many in this country did, the Vietnamese War was the first televised war. What a strange thing that was. Every night on the television in living, gory color. I think there was color TV then, right? Yeah. In living, gory color, you saw all of this, and Americans, through the media and social culture, Americans were encouraged to adopt this really negative attitude towards the Viet Cong. They were gooks. That is the unhealthy engagement we're talking about here. And I want to give, let's bring it to the current time now and give a very practical example of this kind of name calling as an unhealthy engagement. There's another battlefield. You may not be familiar with Vietnam or Japan or other places. All of you are familiar with the roads in New Jersey, which sadly resemble a battlefield from time to time. And people are literally fighting their way through traffic. They're in a hurry to get to work, and if you're in their way, you better watch out. So this very inconsiderate driver cuts you off because they really have this sense of urgency about getting to work. They do something stupid, reckless, and you have to slam on your brakes, and you're irritated, and you shout, "Idiot." Tell me, how different is it from chink, gook, and idiot? You see the message? When you label a person like that, you are two things. We've already talked about dehumanizing them, but more significantly, that's a word for the enemy. Chinks were the enemy. Gooks were the enemy. That idiot is your enemy. You have turned that driver into your enemy. How can you live at peace when you're surrounded by enemies? And if you have to commute to work every day, how many enemies are out there? How many idiots are out there? Lots. Every day you find more and more, or they find you. Either way, it's not pleasant. Well, this is the unhealthy engagement that we can learn to avoid. How? Udasinavat asinaha. A healthy detachment. Engaged detachment. What does that mean? Gunaihi navichalyate. You don't get upset. Knowing that gunaha guneshu vartante iti. Knowing that people just drive like that, especially in New Jersey, but not only in New Jersey. Tell me, is it natural or unnatural when somebody who is desperately in a hurry cuts you off to get ahead in traffic? Is that natural or unnatural? It's absolutely natural. It's how the world works. But what happens is, interesting, what happens is you take it personally. How could he cut me off like that? Do you think he was thinking about you? Could care less about you. It's not about you. And this is a mistake we make frequently that Sri Krishna is addressing here. It's not about you. Gunaha guneshu vartante. It's about nature. Drivers are naturally going to cut you off. And they're doing that not to make you miserable. They're doing that because they feel anxious and pressured about getting to work on time. When they cut you off, what do you think about? When they cut you off, do you think, oh, they must be anxious and worried about getting to work on time? I doubt very much you're thinking like that. You say, how could they cut me off like that? How could they do that to me? Wow. You see the point? We all have a tendency to look at the world through our own lens. And our own lens is pretty small. We become self-focused. We become very narrowly focused on our own agenda, and we forget that other people have their own agendas. So when that person cut you off, this is not to justify it. By the way, we said engaged detachment. The engagement part comes. The detachment part comes, don't get upset. That's the detachment part. The engaged part comes, push down on the brakes really hard and do whatever you have to avoid the accident. So detachment doesn't mean you let the fellow drive you off the road or you smash into something. This healthy detachment means do what needs to be done, gunaihi na vichalyate, without being disturbed, without being distracted. You know, we tend to take these situations personally, unnecessarily, wrongly. We personalize so many things. Somehow this metaphor came in my mind. Suppose in summer, have you ever seen a line of ants crawling up the side of your house, coming in through the window ledge and aiming for the cabinet where you have food stored? This line of ants, right? Okay, that happens a lot. But do these ants have an agenda to make you upset? Ants have an agenda. You get the point. Those ants are just acting like ants act. The drivers who cut you off are just like those ants. They're just, ants are kind of mindless. They're like programmed to do that. The person who cut you off is programmed to do that. Again, not to justify it, but it's absolutely natural. So you don't say, why are these ants coming to my house? Why don't they go to somebody else's house? You don't personalize it like that. And what I'm suggesting is you need not personalize it when somebody cuts you off on the road. There's nothing personal about it. That allows you to have this healthy detachment. You don't call them idiot. You don't turn them into your enemy. That driver who cut you off is not your enemy. Here's another example. You're driving to work, so you get to work, and your boss is there, and your boss is one of those really mean, tough ones, and you don't say this out loud, but you say it in your mind. Tyrant. Here we go. We got gooks, we got chinks, we got idiots, and now we have tyrants. Do you see where I'm going with this? When you call your boss a tyrant, no matter how miserable he might be, to call him a tyrant makes him into your enemy. Why turn your boss into your enemy? Yes, he is difficult to deal with. Absolutely, that's true. But calling him a tyrant, labeling him a tyrant, and turning him into your enemy only makes the situation worse, much worse. Oh, this is a nice memory. I don't think I've told this story ever, I don't think. When I was this would go back to the 1970s, a few years ago, late 1970s. I was working in California as an engineer, and in fact, as a contract engineer, which means I wasn't an employee. So I was working for a manager, and all of this manager's employees, they all thought he was a tyrant. So they hated him. They absolutely hated this guy, tyrant. And not only did they hate him, by the way, when you hate your boss hates, kind of a mutual thing, right? The more you hate your boss, the more your boss ends up being a tyrant. And anyway, you get the idea. But something unique happened. He was my boss, but as a contractor, I had a little different attitude. I wasn't an employee. I wasn't on his personal payroll. I was paid by the company in a different way. And I took a different approach with him, and that is I would go and as we say in American English, I would go and hang out with him in his office. None of his employees would ever hang out with him. He actually loved it when I would come and hang out with him. We'd just talk about whatever. And he became fond of me, and I came to like him, in spite of the fact that he was really a mean blank, blank, blank. You figure that out. But he was mean, and he mistreated his employees. He was not a nice fellow to work with. But I showed him some kindness, and what I received from him was friendliness. Now, if I had labeled him in my mind tyrant, could that have happened? That would never have happened. I didn't label him tyrant. I understood, by the way, when your boss acts in these really rough, pressurizing ways, there's probably a reason. Chances are your boss feels a lot of pressure from his boss, right? If there were no pressure on your boss, chances are he or she would be a lot more relaxed. But generally, in businesses today and then, and tomorrow as well, in the business world, there's a tremendous amount of pressure. So the boss who puts pressure on you does so because they're being pressured themselves. Guna guneshu vartante. You have to understand this. This is natural. This is the way the world works. With this understanding, as Sri Krishna says, yaha avatishtati, one who understands this, na ingate, doesn't get shaken up. A similar example, and then there's a really important one we're coming to. But a similar example is you have an acquaintance or a relative who has hurt you, and I want you to think about who that is. Who is that relative or acquaintance who has done something or said something to hurt you? You got really badly hurt. And you feel, how could they do that to me? We're personalizing again. Tell me, do you think that person only hurts you? That person has an agenda. Of all the people in the world, their agenda is to hurt you. You think so? Or isn't it more likely that that person behaves hurtfully not just to you, but that person behaves hurtfully to others as well? And then if you think a little bit further, people behave in hurtful ways because they themselves have been hurt. You know this, right? You do know this. People who behave in hurtful ways do so because they themselves have been hurt. This is human nature. And you understand it. You understand gunaha guneshu vartante, that nature progresses in a natural manner. When somebody gets hurt, they become hurtful to others. When you understand this, yaha avatishtati, then na ingate, then you won't be disturbed. Now, we come to one more enemy. The point here is that the so-called idiot on the road is not your enemy. The tyrant at work is not your enemy. The person who hurt you is not your enemy. Now we come to the last example. Suppose you're sitting in your chair at home comfortably, and thank goodness you are free from all these enemies. Not. In fact, as you're sitting there in your chair, you're sitting there along with 6 enemies, no less than 6. In Sanskrit literature, they're called shad-adi. 6, literally, adi means enemy. You're sitting there in your chair with 6 enemies: kama, desire; krodha, anger; moha, delusion; matsarya, envy. What am I missing here? Lobha, greed; and mada, this infatuation. These are the list of 6 enemies, and by the way, you can easily add on to that list, not hard. So traditionally, these 6 enemies are said to reside within you. So not only do you have potential enemies out there, but you have these enemies inside you. My gosh, how will you ever find peace in life when the enemies are within you? My God, that's hopeless, right? Maybe you can avoid the enemies outside, quit your job, don't commute, you don't have to worry about the traffic, you don't have to worry about the tyrant, and avoid your friends and relatives and just sit in your chair. You can avoid all those enemies, but you can't avoid these 6 enemies within you. Now, that teaching, it's familiar, I think, to most of you. It's also almost always misunderstood. Let's be very clear about this. These are enemies, all right, but they're not enemies to you personally. They are enemies to enlightenment. That's the context in which this is taught. When gurus and teachers and texts and commentaries talk about the shad-adi, these 6 enemies that dwell within you, the context is always the fact that these are enemies to your enlightenment, enemies to your spiritual growth. They are not your personal enemies. That is so important to understand, because these inner enemies, kama, krodha, lobha, are these, think for a moment, kama, desire; krodha, anger; lobha, greed, grasping. Are these natural or unnatural for human beings? They're absolutely natural. Not desirable, but absolutely natural, just like kids fighting. These 6 enemies are not desirable, but they're natural. Children fighting is not desirable, but it's natural. When children are fighting, what do? There are times when you intervene. When you have these 6, let's rename them. They're not enemies. They are obstacles to spiritual growth. Yes, they're called enemies, but understand it properly. They are not your personal enemies. They are obstacles to your spiritual growth. So when you recognize these 6 obstacles to spiritual growth inside of you, here's what becomes a problem for many people. In fact, we were just studying this chapter 14 on the gunas, and sometimes people feel, I've been on this spiritual path for such a long time, and still there are so many occasions when rajas and tamas overpower me. I can become sometimes so rajasic, so passionate and extrovert. I can become so tamasic, so lethargic and lazy. And I haven't been able to come out of this after so many years or decades of spiritual practice. What's wrong with me? Why am I not more sattvika? You see the problem? You have turned these natural problems into an enemy for you, your own personal enemy. They're inimical to you. You say, I should, that word should, I should be sattvika all the time. I should be. Those 3 words are a huge problem. I should be this, I should not be that, I should not, I should not. There's an American joke that says, hey, when you're talking to someone, you should do this, you should not do that, you should do this, you should not do that. The American joke is, hey, don't should on me. Very appropriate. The sense is those statements, should or should not, are not helpful. When children fight, and you wag your finger at the children, you shouldn't fight. Does that work? Does that help? Doesn't do a thing, right? They go on fighting. If you want them to stop fighting, you have to go and teach them. You can't just wag your finger and say you shouldn't fight. In the same way, when you find inside of you these 6 so-called enemies, which are really not enemies at all, they are obstacles to your personal spiritual growth. When you discover them within you, this should business is unhelpful. Sri Krishna's message here is so profound. First of all, udasinavat asinaha. You should have healthy detachment, not only towards the guy who cuts you off in traffic, not only towards the tyrant boss and the person who hurt you. You should have healthy but engaged detachment towards these 6 obstacles to enlightenment within you. Like the healthy detachment towards the children. Sometimes you just let them play. Sometimes you intervene. Sometimes you let them play. It depends on the situation. So sometimes you have to address these problems within you, but sometimes you have this healthy detachment. Okay, what can I do? I've had this problem for all these years. Isn't it unreasonable to expect this problem to just magically disappear? Over a period of time, whatever your so-called problem is, it can decay. It'll decrease is the right word. But to expect it to suddenly, I'm on a spiritual path now, I shouldn't feel like that. Well, look at those words. I shouldn't feel like this. When you say that, I shouldn't feel like this, you have weaponized your own emotions. Think about that. I shouldn't feel like this. Now, you feel like that, that's a fact, and that you feel like that is natural, right? Somebody does something hurtful to you, you feel hurt. But then you say, oh, I shouldn't, I'm a spiritual person, I shouldn't feel hurt. by saying those words, I shouldn't feel like this, you turn that hurt, which is a natural emotion, you turn it into a weapon against yourself. Or to use other language, you turn your own mind into an enemy. The person who cuts you off on the road is not your enemy. That obnoxious boss is not your enemy. The person who hurt you is not your enemy. And certainly your mind is not your enemy. Going back to the children example, I can imagine their parents are sitting inside trying to have some peace and quiet. Children are running and shouting. That's not a pleasant situation. Is it natural? Absolutely. Would any parent say that the children, here I am trying to be quiet and enjoy some peace and calm. My children are running around and shouting, my children are the enemy. No parent would ever have that conclusion. Because children are children. People who cut you off on the road are like that. Your boss is like that. The person who hurt you is just like that. And your mind is what it is for thousands and thousands of reasons. It's natural, part of nature. Gunaha guneshu vartante. So Sri Krishna says we have to learn, here's the message. We have to learn to understand nature as it is, and we have to discern very carefully when we should engage ourselves in trying to change things and when we should just back off and just let it be. Sometimes the right thing to do is just to let it be. When that person cuts you off, your responsibility is only to press down on the brake pedal. You have no responsibility to inform the other driver, roll down your window and you start shouting at that person. That's not your responsibility. In the same way, when we're dealing with these problems in the mind, and one last time, let me make it clear. Shad Adi, 6 enemies. They're not your enemies. They are obstacles to spiritual growth. So when you deal with these traits in your mind that do create problems, difficulties, they hold you back. When you discover them, when you deal with them, maybe we can deal with them the way we deal with children. So when the children are shouting and screaming and all of this, if you shout back at the children, is that a good strategy? And I know parents do that. But you also know it's not a very effective way of dealing with children. In the same way, when you discover these things inside you that you don't like, if your response is the equivalent of shouting at them, it doesn't work. To shout at the driver who cut you off does nothing. To shout at the tyrant boss gets you fired. And to shout at the person who hurt you only makes the situation worse. You need a balanced, intelligent response. And you can only have that balanced, intelligent response if yo na vichalyate, gunaihi na vichalyate, only if you're not disturbed. So it takes some degree of healthy detachment and equanimity. If we cultivate what Sri Krishna is teaching us here in chapter 14, and that is to understand the natural nature, the natural nature of the world. Just like ants do their thing naturally, people cut you off on a road naturally. Some bosses are naturally tyrant. Some people are naturally hurtful. And some aspects of your mind, even though they're undesirable, they are natural. With this understanding, you can respond in each of these situations so much more effectively. Instead of getting angry, instead of getting hurt, instead of shouting, or instead of crying, if you don't get overwhelmed, na ingate, the verse says, one who doesn't get shaken. If you're not shaken up by all these situations, you can respond in such a helpful way, in an appropriate way, a way that prevents you from getting angry and hurt, and most importantly, a way that solves the problem. When the children are running around and shouting at the children doesn't work. Teaching the children works. And that's a good strategy for dealing with the problems of our own mind. Kind of figuratively shouting at ourselves, I shouldn't be like that, my mind shouldn't be like that. That's the equivalent of shouting at ourselves. It doesn't work. In fact, it's hurtful. On the other hand, if you can understand that the children who are shouting, maybe they need a hug in the same way. That mind that's complaining needs a hug, so to speak. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to your mind. Just to finish this talk, your mind is not your enemy. Just to summarize the whole thing, the person who cut you off is not your enemy. The tyrant boss is not your enemy. The person who hurt you is not your enemy. And these 6 so-called enemies inside your mind are not your enemies. So with the help of the teachings of Sri Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita, we can learn to deal with all these difficulties of life in such a more graceful manner, a more helpful manner. And it's my hope and prayer that in this coming new year, first of all, my hope and prayer is that you're blessed with fewer people that cut you off on the road, fewer tyrants at work, fewer people that hurt you. But I can pray for you in that way, but no one can guarantee it. So there, you will still get cut off on the road. You still will have to deal with the tyrant boss, and you still will get hurt by people. So for all those reasons, the second part of my prayer is that these teachings of Sri Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita should bless you. They really go in so that you realize that none of these are your enemy. If they're not your enemy, it becomes so much more pleasant to deal with them. Remember my metaphor of the boss. His employees hated him. When I befriended him, we had a great time. So instead of turning all of these into your enemies, think about befriending them and handling it with this wisdom that Sri Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita. My prayer is that that wisdom should go in and should change the way you relate to others, and that you should not consider anyone, including your own mind, to be your enemy. They're not your enemy. Okay, enough said. And that brings us to the end of our program. All right. Some announcements. We'll finish in just a few minutes, and afterwards I'll sit out, and if you'd like to exchange New Year's greetings, and I'll have some fruit to give you, you can come up and meet me after the program. Also, there we'll set out the extra flowers at the altar, so if you'd like to go to the altar and offer flowers after your prayers, you can also do that after the class. I'm very happy to announce some new Sanskrit classes. being offered here. Vasanti, my assistant, is going to offer 2 classes. Both classes will be offered online. Beginning on January 10th, which is a week from Tuesday, she is going to begin an Introduction to Sanskrit class, introductory Sanskrit. So if you want to learn Sanskrit from the beginning, this is your opportunity. By the way, I used to teach Sanskrit classes here. She's much better than me. She is so much more patient and helpful. I'm kind of like in a hurry. I want to get to reading Shankara Bhashya. This is kind of my thinking. Come on, let's go. So anyway, you will really enjoy her classes. Very delightful. So starting a week from Tuesday, you can attend her classes online. And then a week from Thursday on January 12th, I can't read my scribbling here. On January 12th, she is going to resume her advanced Sanskrit class, which is a more Sanskrit reading class. It's a class that presumes that you know the basics of Sanskrit grammar. But the focus is not on grammar, the focus is on reading. And in that class, you'll be reading the wonderful text, Ashtavakra Gita. Just excellent text. So you'll enjoy reading that. You can subscribe for these classes on our website. Wait a few days. The subscription part is not ready yet, so wait a few days and go to our website and you can subscribe because you have to be able to access the online class. Also, our regular Saturday and Sunday classes will resume next week. Saturday classes, as you know, are guided meditation, followed by Bhagavad Gita. In fact, we'll start chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita this coming Saturday. In the first meditation class of each year, we have a special New Year meditation. And we do this exactly once each year. We'll be doing that New Year meditation this coming Saturday. And then Sunday, of course, our other classes will resume. The Sunday, the Vedanta class, Upadesha Sahasri, and the Satsanga, the question-answer session that follows. Final announcement is to find out about what programs are, if there are any changes to our programs. You need to be informed about those changes, especially this time of year where we have cancellations due to weather. Our policy here is if the roads are hazardous, we will cancel classes. That's how it works. If it's cold, we won't cancel classes. If it's some light snow, we may not cancel classes. So the criteria is when the roads are hazardous. We will cancel classes. And the only way to find out whether or not a class is canceled or not is to, on our website, subscribe for program announcements. Go to our website on the homepage, subscribe for program announcements, and you will receive an email whenever a class is canceled due to weather, or if there's any other change in our program, or special programs like this program. Okay. That concludes our program for today. Once again, I wish you all a very, very, very happy New Year, wonderful year ahead of us all. We'll conclude with our closing prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.